So we'll make a brief video now on the importance of studying Latin. But we need to ask, what performance benefit in living, or the art of living, this art of speaking Latin confers? In plain English, why bother? What's really the point? How does it benefit me besides paying off psychological or imagined debts to some tradition, some deity, and so on? You might imagine that great poems or great literature written in this language ought to be preserved, transmit an important message, and so on. But the fact remains, no one really speaks Latin today. I'm looking away unconfidently from the camera because this is kind of an improvisation. I know that Latin forms the basis of a great many words in the English language, especially conceptual words, terms, and so on, besides serving as the backbone of the Romance languages.
How you doing?
Good. How are you?
Come on, doggy. Let's go. Come on. Come on.
So you might think, well, I'll learn Latin so I can speak better Spanish. However, many people speak Spanish without knowing any Latin directly or consciously whatsoever. And the same could apply to French, Italian, Romanian, other Romance languages, and so on. So, yeah, and I'm sure that you could do a study and say, well, all these polyglots have mastered the entire family of Romance languages, and they don't know a lick of Latin. So Latin produces no observable performance benefit, whether in the acquisition of these languages or the, correctness of translation, and so on, however you would measure it, and so on. So, yeah, and just stumbling along producing throwaway content. I don't know if the brand of the channel to be promoted is, well, I'm half autistic or savant or none of them, and so on. But yeah, so anyway, with Latin, why bother? Well, so besides the etymological benefits, you have a more profound sense of grammar, and grammar lets you understand the machinery of reasoning. Whether you think reason is just reason itself, or many are the ways or styles of reasoning, or different kinds of thinking, fine. So notwithstanding these evident benefits, let's remind ourselves, or ignoring these obvious benefits, so consider that the ancient languages like Latin are mostly inflected, so sentences deliver meaning without being entirely dependent upon the word order. Word order has some use, but mainly for emphasis in Latin. And so basically, if I take any word in a sentence, the role that it plays, whether it's a subject, verb, or object, or it's adverbial or an adjective, or so on, etc. The role that the word plays depends on what it is. That is how it shows itself. The ending will indicate what gender, number, case, and maybe a few other aspects of the term that I'm forgetting. But where it is, or where it occurs in the word order, has low correlation, if any at all, with its meaning in the sentence, what role it plays in delivering the overall message. So contrast that with modern languages, such as English, which are heavily dependent on the regularity of subject, verb, object, or object sometimes called direct complement or accusative. They're heavily dependent on this pattern to deliver meaning, precisely because, for the most part, the words either don't have or have lost their traditional endings, which again indicate what? Gender, number, case, and whatever else I'm forgetting in that regard. So yeah, where a word is in the sentence pretty much determines its meaning or role in that sentence. So a modern language like English is, I think it's what linguists call analytical, but I think it's more precise to say, well, yeah, it's all about the location. It's like the base 10 system. You see a number like 1,234. It's just written 1, 2, 3, 4, but but where a numeral occurs in that number or in that series of numbers determines what? It determines whether it's thousands, hundreds, tens, and so on. So each numeral has a place value, or the number itself is composed of place value. So that's an analogy anyway to consider subject, verb, object, or doer, action, and victim, but saying victim not in a criminal sense, just an easy way to remember that. So yeah, and obviously in Latin you can say, Dominus servum verberat, the Lord hits the slave or the servant. So, but you can put it in any order. You could say servum Dominus verberat or something like that. It's understood that Dominus, having the us, ending is in the nominative, and servum with the ending, masculine accusative. So it's obviously the object of the action, which is, I guess, striking. Verberat. So, yeah. But, it's been, 8 pointless minutes, and we haven't really gotten to the point. But what I think I want to say, anyway, is that, no one speaks Latin. So, right. And modern languages that we do speak are kind of beholden to this place value system, where a word occurs in the sentence, determining its role or meaning or whatever, versus what? Its qualities, it's how it shows itself by its ending. And, and so, which is, the ancient way, it's more about whatness rather than whereness, if those words may be coined for the purpose of this video. Now, you might say, well, that's good, learning Latin, it frees me from the where first modern mentality. Great, I can think more natively, easily, with an ancient mindset, prioritizing the question what at a constitutional level as opposed to where. So I prefer to think more so about species, especially different tribes of Gaul, for example, or different features of different trees or so on. Besides different kinds of mankind, whether, different nations, but also any hierarchy in a society. Especially with the assumption that people are born fundamentally different. They aren't equal. Their genetic codes make them radically distinct. So the environment, of course, where doesn't play that big of a role. at least according to this mentality. So, but yeah, you could say, well, that's cool. If I have an ancient mentality or I can simulate it, then I better appreciate the ancient arts, whether it's sculpture. So not just language, but I don't know, ancient arts, sculpture, but also mathematics, geometry. I have a better understanding of the root assumptions in which, location their philosophers had moved. I understand their limitations better because they didn't have these big ideas about environment, universe, and so on. They were thing or body specific rather than milieu. But look at the results in terms of warfare of the ancient engineering. I'm not going to call it science, but so you can form a Roman legion, a ballista. I don't know, maybe you have great archers, but you don't have cannons, you don't have rockets, let alone atomic bombs and so on. So, this is great. If we're scholars, we can even better preserve the works of antiquity. That's cool because, if we learn Latin, then we train our brains at an intuitive level. So by intuitive, I refer to things that are done more automatically, like speaking your native language, seeing with your eyes, breathing, rather than thinking abstractly, making calculations, which, you may know. You may be tempted to do something, commit some action, but that the consequences might not be favorable to yourself or those around you. So, anyway, conscience is all about making present what you know, not necessarily see, so you can see the consequences of possible deeds. But anyway, if there are only two mentalities, ancient and modern, if I'm naively modern without any ancient intuition whatsoever, I have a military advantage. For example, I may be a member of a industrial democracy with a large army, with a lot of technology. So Latin, ancient wisdom, what is it going to do for me? I would say that the value of Latin is actually wholly negative. It's not so much that it takes you back to an ancient mentality, but that it takes you out of a modern mentality. And if you know well what it is, you can also avoid becoming ensnared in that mentality as well. That is, you don't want to be either ancient or modern, but you want to emphasize a third way of thinking. Whether we call it a mentality or a way of thinking, or maybe seeing, more intuitive way of speaking, I'm not sure what to call it, but numerically, a third distinct from the two members of this traditional antithesis. And we had kind of alluded to it in another video that at an interrogative level, the ancient mentality is based on allocating muchness, or it's saying of the how muchness I allocate most of it to the question what, whereas for the moderns, given concepts like environment, universe, and so on, I do think that it's all about the where, especially given the English phrase, there is a leaf over there. So the implicit singular environmental entity. Now, obviously today in various disciplines like software, these root locational assumptions are challenged when architects discover the limitations of a monolith, for example, and prefer a system of microservices that work together. Yeah. So, anyway, what's more important, talking to other people or what you make? That is, the value of Latin is this third mentality that you might make. It's not about conducting business with people that speak Latin, because again, no one speaks Latin. So what's the point? It doesn't give you that kind of advantage. So it would be silly for me to promise you great conversations with contemporaries. Then again, of course, you could say, well, I appreciate Seneca's letters all the more, not in translation, but in the original. But that's just worship. That's just imaginary debt payment, preservation. That's not true creation. And yeah, and I think if we even bother taking religion seriously, that creation is much better than law, any law which ordains that customs be observed, commandments kept. We unbind those fetters, sweep them aside. It's just not as important as making new, because the great making new, howsoever destructive, resonates with the original making.